These are the two primary figures responsible for the East Palestine disaster and architects of precision scheduled railroading. I want you to remember that phrase, precision scheduled railroading. Write it down if you have to, because this is the process that has. Yeah, this is the process that has decayed American infrastructure that we need to hold business parasites and politicians accountable for reversing. Precision scheduled railroading, which is crippling labor and destroying North America's railways for Wall Street profits. So these two ghouls, Bill Ackman and E. Hunter Harrison, make those guys famous. Let's make those guys famous. Make them famous. Y'all, make them famous. So in 2011, activist investor Bill Ackman developed a majority shareholder position in Canadian Pacific Railroad, one of the big seven Class 1 railway companies in North America. Although CP services were rated best in North America, Ackman noticed their operating margin was slim. So that's how much profit you pull in. They can be making more profits. And whenever a private investor says could be making more profits, you should be alarmed. But we'll get to how we can use that to our advantage here. Using his newly acquired majority shareholder position over CP, he replaced former CEO Green with Harrison in hopes Harrison would deploy his novel precision scheduled railroading, there's that phrase, management style that would drastically cut labor and other operating expenses. Operating expenses, which is a fancy word for the things that you need to prevent chemical explosions. Harrison took over the company and immediately enforced new rules, limiting crew size on railroad carriers to one person. He slashed the workforce, slashed maintenance and security costs, and cut benefits, sick leave to the remaining labor force. That video I showed you of the axle that was on fire and nobody sounded an alarm for that for 20 miles. An axle that was just on fire for 20 miles, and there was no alarm set off to prevent this from happening or to slow down the train. That is part of this process of gutting the train industry. There were no mechanisms in place to stop this because they were cut for profit. Just like I said in my last video, where this is the same exact thing that we saw in American hospitals, why hospitals were not prepared for a pandemic scenario, even though they are required by law to prepare for a pandemic scenario, is because the PPE and other life-saving equipment that hospitals need by law to stockpile, have a margin of stockpiling for, those stockpiles were sold to fatten the wallets of private shareholders like Ackman and Harrison. Only instead of hospitals, this is trains. This is just how American industry works. This is how private industry works. You gut the public infrastructure for private gain. You privatize the profits and you socialize the losses. That is how private industry works. In his 5 years at Canadian Pacific, Harrison brought the operating costs as a percentage of revenue, with a lower ratio being better, to 58% for fiscal year 2016, down from 81.3% in 2011, the last full year before Harrison took over. So he lowered the operating ratio, just cutting workers, security, and maintenance, so you're spending less money keeping the railway safe and laborers safe, so that the amount of profit you rake in goes up. Norfolk Southern, by the way, making $3 billion of profit last year. That's why this had to happen. That's why the people of East Palestine were breathing in hydrogen chloride for several days, because these ghouls wanted to keep their $3 billion in profits and continue to profit by being the ones to say they have the right to, they have the nerve to say that they should be the ones testing the air and water. Uh, that's what disaster capitalism is. That is what disaster capitalism is. Disaster capitalism. Disaster capitalism is what was it? I lost the train of thought. Yeah, disaster capitalism is the calculated before a disaster is the calculated uh, risk that explosions like this are not just a possibility, are very likely when you are cutting maintenance, security, and labor. They're likely, but still less costly than the expenses of maintaining the safety of the railway system. Having the explosion, losing the cargo is and not to mention people who get sick and possibly die. That risk is less expensive than just systematically cutting maintenance, labor, and security costs. That's before the disaster happens. And after the disaster happens, private companies and government retards come in to centralize executive authority under their control, deferring all local autonomy and autonomy of workers to them so that they can continue making a profit by posing their own solutions to the problem, which conveniently make them money. I do recommend reading Disaster Capitalism by Naomi Klein. It's a good book. Um, but continuing with the thread, after implementing PSR at three major railroads, Illinois Central, CN, and CP, Hunter was offered a massive $110 million deal to become CEO of CSX Transportation. Due to Harrison's role, every major rail line in North America has more or less adopted PSR. This is standard practice. This is standard practice. That's why this keeps happening. That's why this happened again today. That's why it's going to happen. I mean, if you have 1,500 derailments a year, then statistically that means that at least 2 derailments happen a day. So that's probably not even the only derailment that happened today in Michigan. There's probably another, statistically speaking, because this is standard practice. In 2021, BNSF and Union Pacific reported record profits of $6.5 billion and $6 billion, respectively, while Norfolk Southern reported a record $4.5 billion and CSX notched $3.8 billion. This while workforce cuts mounted over 40%. When you have just this skeleton crew of working class dudes transporting deadly chemicals and and these schools who own Norfolk Southern and who run these practices, that's just they just continue to cut labor costs. As this insane chart, so just like that's crazy. Nearly a 400% increase in stock price. Nearly 400%. The people profiting off of our poisoned air and water, the people profiting off of our back-breaking labor. So even when we do everything right and we warn them that this is going to happen, that they have been like that not just that our infrastructure is breaking down, the tools that we are working with are breaking down so that our trains are being derailed. But even for 20 miles on the track, when the engineers are saying our train is on fire, we are given no ability to restore our infrastructure, even when we do everything right. Even up to the point of there being a disaster and the train derails and they have to do a controlled burn, even then, we have the government bungles the evacuation so that the people of East Palestine have to be breathing in hydrogen chloride for 2 days. Also that stock owners can get that 400% increase in like into their pockets. From 2010 to 2020, $196 billion were redistributed to shareholders in the industry. Meanwhile, only $156 billion were spent on track and train maintenance. The result of this profits before people approach is precisely the kind of disasters we saw in East Palestine. What's that? What's that grammar there? Well, yeah. I mean, you know what he's saying is that the disaster is directly caused because shareholders are increasing their profits while decreasing operating costs, which keep the railway system safe, as well as just human beings safe. All the while, railroad workers are having their lives ruined. They are expected to be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and are penalized for doctor's visits, emergencies, or even jury duty. I know we all remember the railroad strike that was happening last year that Joe Biden just without hesitation condemned. Said like this is supposed like he called himself the president of labor, but passed historic executive decisions attacking the rights of laborers, attacking the rights of laborers to strike, to improve their working conditions which prevent crashes like this. Everyone at every level of government is responsible. The shareholders of Norfolk Southern are responsible. The people the architects of this style of management and private industry are responsible and should be called up, blamed, replaced, not with more members of private industry who employ the same practices, but just replaced with we are the owners now. The train engineers who run the goddamn trains at Norfolk Southern, they're the shareholders now. They're the dictators over the trains now. You know what? Let them have 100% control of those 400% of profits, and let them decide what to do with the profits that they are generating. So going on the environmental impacts of the crash, which I went over. So E. Hunter Harrison died in 2017, but Bill Ackman still remains at large with Pershing Square Capital Management. Will he be held accountable for what happened to the people in Ohio? Will he be held accountable for the lives of the railroad workers he has ruined? If you happen to live in Ohio and you make calls to people like DeWine and other members of your representatives, we can clearly hold these people accountable for. Because if we I have seen people saying on Twitter, if this happened in China, this guy would be in jail already. Quick trial, jail. After an if the investigation was thorough enough to see what other stuff he was responsible for, if this happens as often as it does, he might even have been executed. But yeah, 2 weeks in China, he would have been in jail, easy, life sentence. That's what we mean by accountability. Put people like this, like Bill Ackman, in jail.